Okay, so people are working on stuff. That's good. Look here, Colette turned in something early. She has an image, it's animation. She clicks on a thing. Great. This is great. Again, this week's assignment, a picture you've drawn, just something happening. This doesn't need, in fact, it doesn't need to be some sort of grand artistic statement at all. Just, right, what are we doing here? What's the class called? Right? Okay. And I think it may help people feel less stressed here if you think, first of all, I'm demonstrably and well recognized as possibly one of the friendliest people on the entire campus. So keep that in mind as we keep going. Although I may speak strongly about sort of the world at large, that's not directed at you guys, right? We are learning skills incrementally. Part of what presents a problem for me in this class, and anyone who would teach this class, is that you guys all have a ton of exposure to both the things that people in this program do, video games, and then movies / animation. So you've seen a bunch of it, right? And you have ideas about what it is that you want to make. Those things will not be achievable in week. How many classes have we had? Yeah, I think we're in week 4. We've had like 5 classes because we already missed one because of Martin Luther King Day, right? Okay, and so do I seem like the kind of guy who's going to fly off the handle here, giving you some sort of crazy, expecting a ton of stuff based on what we've been doing? Like, no, I'm not, all right? I want to be totally supportive here. We are just building skills incrementally. So does this mean you're going to need to sort of, make some things here at the beginning where you're just establishing a skill? Yes. Okay. I input a picture, I made it interact, and it moved. Awesome. That's great. We've incrementally established that. This isn't my first rodeo. I've taught this class for like, I don't know, 9 years? A long time. And this is the class that's changed the most, right? The tools for this class have changed crazy amount over the amount of time we've been working, which has been amazing. However, we get to do a lot of cool things here, but a lot of people are coming in with the least amount of experience. And in general, I teach community college. I don't expect people to come in with any experience. That's been one of the major changes in my entire educational philosophy, right? The school is set up so that like you take this class and you take that class, then you take this class. Unfortunately, that's not a reality. No one does that for a variety of reasons I don't need to get into. It's just the idea that we sequence things and I can count that everybody who's taking 200 already took 184 is just not the way the institution functions, because people are trying to get their degree done quickly. Scheduling is what it is. There's a bunch of problems there, right, that are beyond my control. And so for each class, I kind of start at no expectation of previous knowledge, which is why we've been incrementally building things up. So if the people are ambitious, that's great, right? Try to hold on to that, but we need to take incremental steps. We've done this semester after semester after semester, and where people have ended up at the end has been great, right? But they've taken incremental steps along the way. So when you're thinking about this has happened to me too. I get sidetracked by some other part, something I don't know as well, and I end up dumping too much time into that part, and then the rest of the project suffers. This is a real part of doing this kind of work, is that there's just so much distraction online. Doing this kind of work, there's lots of people doing it. There's lots of distraction, okay? But when you do that, perhaps a way to rein yourself back in is that you're kind of costing yourself the opportunity to actually build up the simple skill that we're trying to do this week. The simple skills that we're building up in the class are there because I'm incrementally working towards being able to implement a bunch of different things at the same time, right? If we can increment and implement basic interaction and basic animation, then once you leverage that in the whole game engine, then that ends up being very, very powerful. Versus sort of like, here's a huge completed thing and then being confused by it. So the overarching message here is in general, I find this really good advice. Keep it simple here, especially at the beginning, in terms of like, I'm just trying to do a thing. Like the thing Colette put together here, where she's got some previous characters she drew. Not all of this goes together 100%, but she got, she established the skill. She was able to bring in the 3D model, some animation. She had some things interact. Excellent. That's all. That's as much of a bar as I wanted you to clear this week, right? So, and this is your opportunity to take that step, right? Not be sidetracked with a bunch of other stuff and worry about baking Blender textures, because that's a whole other, really boring lecture I'm going to give, but we just haven't had it yet, right? And so because we, again, as we established, this is class 5 or whatever, right? So we just haven't had that much time, and there's a lot of stuff to do here. So keep that stuff in mind. Like, I understand people get distracted. I have been distracted and like just shoveled time into things that were completely irrelevant throughout my creative career, to a degree that which, when you look back, is, there's no, you're here, you're on this path. It's not a straight artistic path. And then at times there's some sort of detour, and then you gotta backtrack to get here. But it's your path. Everybody's path is unique, and there's just frankly no other way you could get to where you are now via the route that you took, all right? I'm not trying to waste everyone's time. There's a reason I've laid things out, trying to incrementally build them in a way that makes sense. So, let's keep that in mind going forward, right? Just take a step back from the project if it's being super, super problematic. And especially as we go on, we're going to have things that we're working on week after week after week. And so we're taking these incremental steps on the same thing. Here at the beginning, in order to just do a couple different things, it works a lot better to just sort of make a new thing. Okay, now just make a couple of these. Now just make a couple of these. Because if you keep building on the same thing at the beginning, I find that people make a mistake at the beginning, and then it just sort of snowballs throughout the beginning of the class. So having these discrete packets of doing stuff, they're not going to be your magnum opus. They're not going to be something that you put in your portfolio. But the whole second half of the class, we're working on something that you are going to put in your portfolio, because at that point you'll have some skills to actually make something that's a little bit more interesting. So maybe it will help to sort of see some of where we're going here. Let me pull up last semester's class. Canvas does not make this easy. Where is the thing? This one, okay. One thing we may do differently is not use Adobe Portfolio. Okay. Okay, so here's some of the stuff we did last semester. Here's one student's game, sort of this post-apocalyptic thing of a, Mad Max-inspired character running around, this post-apocalyptic landscape and a car, some of the pre-visualization stuff. Here's some shots from the game. Here's some of the interactive design stuff. So this is Sketchfab. We'll learn about this later. This is a way that you can embed 3D models on web pages. And so this is like her hero character for the game. Here's another thing for, prop, some more pre-visualization, process sketches, animation sketches, or not, this is the animation from in the game in Unity. You guys can see now this is clearly in Unity at this point. And some of the video here, I'm not going to pull up the actual game, but this is some video playthrough of what's going on. So one of the super fun. In this game is I thought it was a super successful project. It was so you need to make sure. So that was, but that was the product of like 2 months of working on that, going from that just very, very, very early sketch. Some of you were in class with Alec. His project from last semester was great. Here it is. So he did like an Egyptian kind of thing, kind of Indiana Jones / Egyptian thing, but with these very cute characters, taking a lot of inspiration from actual Egyptian archaeology and some cute mummies, cute fox. Actually changed the camera. He's got little icons. Again, his character here, I thought worked out really well. Some of his animation cycles for the character, right? But again, this is the final. This wasn't like the result of 1 week. Here, he's doing the thing that you've seen 100 times in video games where the same base mesh is like recolored or repainted, which is super useful. Some more props, some more GIFs of what's going on, and some of what's going on in this one. So we're going fun places, and yeah, this is all put together in Unity. Again, taking those incremental steps, sort of learning how to put together the incremental parts of animation and interactivity, having the character animated, being able to move the character around. Super cute, really, really, really successful, super well done. Yeah, leveraging these things. So we're going someplace cool, but it's going to take a while to get there. And I don't expect that everyone comes in with a bunch of skills. It'd be great to have people, yeah, I mean, maybe it would be, but it's just not the reality of like, certainly community college, and then even, I know most of the people who teach at ASU. It's not like it's that much different there either, right? That are people are taking all the courses in the correct sequence. It's just the way that modern, post-secondary education works. The sequencing is not great. So, right, because there's people taking 184 while they're taking 200 right now. Ideally, you could get one before the other, but we also don't want to keep people here for 8 years, right? That sort of also defeats the purpose of community college, in that, if it takes you some sort of like half a decade to complete your community college degree, that's really not in anyone's best interest either, right? So it's all compromises, right? And this is the current state of the compromises. This is kind of where we've been at for a while. So yeah, I'll post a couple more of those from some of the other students that said they wanted to share them. But yeah, we're going to cool places. A couple things also I saw go across on Discord here. Let's look. this over. Okay. What type of image format did we talk about that we want to bring into Unity? PNGs, right? Because they've got the right kind of channels. R for red, G for green, B for blue, and additionally the alpha channel, right? This is the preferred format. The other thing that I may have mentioned that may have gone less paid attention to is that PNGs are uncompressed, right? So this is one of the other, we talked about one difference between JPEG and PNG is that JPEGs don't have an alpha channel. And so they do not serve our purposes here, right? JPEGs are a publication format. They're designed to be small so that people can look at them on their phones quickly. They're not an authoring format. People who make stuff, right? When you're making things, that's an authoring format. When you're publishing things, that's a publishing format. PNG is an authoring format. It's not good for the web because it's big. It means it would take you longer to download it and look at your phone. And so that's not what you want for publishing. So with that in mind, if you have a whole pile of large uncompressed pings, this will be big. You could have a lot of megabytes here. In fact, you could have so many megabytes that you end up with gigabytes, right? And Finch, how many megabytes in a gigabyte? Yep, 1,000 megabytes in 1 gigabyte, right? So that's, you should know that conversion. Okay, that's why we want this, because they're uncompressed. That's good for authoring and mixing and layering, and they're PNG formats. Okay, now there's the issue of coming from other formats, and when you've created other things, right? So the two places to make 2D images in Adobe Creative Suite are Photoshop, right, and Illustrator. What is the difference between these two? In Photoshop, you output pixels, right? Anyone know the other word for this? What type of, when it's a pixel-based image? Raster. I would write that in my notes, right? Anytime you rasterize something, you turn it into a bunch of pixels. Maya, what kind of stuff do you make in Illustrator? What kind of things are we making in Illustrator? What's the type of, what's the workspace? Vector. Vector. You've heard that before, right? Yes. Vector. Vector, what is a vector? It is not pixels. It is instructions that eventually get rasterized on your screen, which lets you scale them, okay? So this is good for, the quintessential example here is logos, right? If you're all future designers, if someone sends you a Photoshop file or a PNG of their logo, do not accept that, ever. That is not an acceptable logo format, right? Why? Because we want to put our logo on business cards, theoretically, or
like billboards and like really big things.
right. And we can do that because logos should be vectors, right? When we go to print a business card, it gets rasterized to that resolution. When we go to submit a billboard graphic, it gets rasterized to that resolution. So at the end of the day, the vector does end up as pixels, but it gets converted for the target, right? Whereas in Photoshop, we're working at a specific pixel resolution the whole time, right? We're just editing a grid of pixels. That's all Photoshop is doing. It's a bunch of tools for editing a grid of pixels, okay? Now, with this in mind, there's the issue of what are we doing with this image? Is it going on a screen or is it being printed? Okay. I don't have a lot of expertise in print. I don't print things, right? I just put stuff on screens. It's like my whole job and career. I haven't, I don't, people don't come to me for brochure design. It's not my thing, okay? But this, because you guys are taking graphic design 1 often, right? Or that's part of the program, right? 181 right now, AVC 181. You will print things in there, okay? And so we have 2 terms that get often confused here, PPI and DPI, right? So pixels, points per inch, and dots per inch. So the takeaway here is that which format, putting things on a screen or putting things in print, requires more pixels or dots. Print by a bit. So when you print something, I'm sure Michelle and other people have been teaching you 181. I've told you we want to print stuff at least 300 PPI or DPI, right? Yeah. Because that's when the printer passes its little print head over the paper, it's putting 300 dots in the space of 1 inch. This is very dense. It looks good, right? It'll look continuous. We won't be able to see the individual dots if they're that small, if they're that, okay? So this is high. Here's what you need to write down. A screen, this isn't quite as simple as it used to be, but for our purposes, a screen is 72 DPI. Okay? Some screens are a little bit better now, right? They go up to 90-ish, depending on whatever. And so the little pixels that light up on the screen there's 72 of them in 1 inch. Whereas when you print it on paper, there's 300 little impressions from the printer on 1 inch of the paper. Okay, so print demands this higher density there. Okay, so if you take now this gets confusing because this is the quote unquote resolution of the final media that you're making, right? Which to some extent is removed or different from the total number of dots or pixels in whatever it is that you've created, right? Sometimes you can scale it up and scale it down. But if you take stuff for print and just dump it onto a screen, you're going to end up with too much detail. Which, if you're just printing, if you're just showing a slide on a TV, who cares? It's not that big a deal, right? But as I've said multiple times in this class, all the stuff that you could sort of just who cares about before, because you were just making still images, digital still images, now we care because we're not making digital still images anymore. We're making video games. And now we need to not just show one image, we need to show how many images a second. What's the frame rate of a video game that we want to get? 60. We want to have 60 frames per second, right? And so we got to do way more compute than we do for just like, here's my static digital image, which if it needs to be resized, doesn't really matter because the computer's fast enough to do that one thing, okay? So, because I think I saw some people bringing in stuff from print at 300 and bringing it into Unity, right? So images that have been formatted for print are going to be this, too much detail to use. Will Unity let you bring them in? Like most of the time, I think so, yes, although it may throw up a few errors. But that's going to be too big. So hold on. Let me just open up this thing I'm going to try to do after this.
Also, big question. So if the case were to occur, what would happen? Would I still be able to get full credit if I turn in the assignment like after Tuesday night?
Yes. Okay. I also don't do a whole bunch of marking off for late. The penalty for being late is not having a chance for us to look at your stuff on Wednesdays, right? Is that we kind of, in the past, people fall behind the weekly cadence of the class, and, you know, hashtag real talk, a lot of them do not catch up. So if you're committed to catching up, yes, okay. I'm not, if you've noticed, the Canvas shell thing doesn't close at 8 o'clock on 8. The 8 o'clock, do people turn it in after 8 o'clock? Yes. Do you think I noticed that? Yes. Do I subtract it from their grade? Most of the time, no, unless they've really egregiously made it a problem for everyone, including me. And so the part of me setting the 8 o'clock deadline is me telling myself I'm helping future generations value sleep as opposed to working all night on the project. Did I work on projects all night more than I do now when I was your age? Yes. But, you know, as I get older, as people learn more, you know, sleep's important, like really important. You're compromising a bunch of stuff by not sleeping. So I'm trying in my own gentle way to encourage you to get some sleep by putting that at 8 o'clock rather than midnight like a lot of other Canvas classes. Okay, so that's my thinking there. Am I staying up till midnight on Tuesdays to see who's turning it in late? I am not. I've been in bed for like 3 hours at that point. Let me open this up. Okay, well, that's doing their thing. Okay, so sure, we'll take this. Okay. Let's just do this first, and then I guess we'll batch it. I think Finch said you drew on really large canvases on Procreate, right? And so that's good that you're creating in that large size. But yeah, if we're going to bring it into this real-time environment, I'm not telling you to make your canvas smaller. I'm just telling you to format the stuff that's coming out of there. So if you just have a still image here, under Photoshop, we just have image size. And, right, so this is where people get confused often, is that we have the size, and then you see the size in inches, and then this should start to make a lot more sense now, right? Right now, it's set to screen. If I were to watch this, right? So it says at 72 pixels per inch, it's this big. If I make it here, that many, we'll get less inches out of the same thing because it's at the end of the day, it's only so many pixels, right? So up here. Okay, so now 11,000 pixels by 6,048 pixels. Does this seem like a good size for something in Unity? Why not?
It takes up way too much storage or RAM, I guess, because of it having to compute all the colors at
Yeah, it's too big, right? But we want to, what is too big? Okay, so up until now, we've kind of glossed over this. We're making digital, an interactive digital movie, right? And so there's two main properties of this here. One is the frame rate. We discussed how this is different, right? Our frame rate, how is our frame rate different from what you do in 184? The frame rate here is variable, right? This is different. In After Effects, runs at whatever frame rate you told it to. 60, 30, 24, 12, whatever it is, right? Here, Unity will scale it up and scale it down in order to try and show people the best. This. But it could drop down. This is the question you asked about delta time is related to this issue because we have variable frame rate, okay? What is the other main property? The size of the resolution here, right? The actual grid of pixels we're making. And so we are going to target HD here. I saw someone crank their thing to 4K, and I would say, don't do that. How big is HD? Very good, 1920 by 1080. If you don't have that memorized, memorize that, okay? We're gonna target this, okay? Most of the TVs at Best Buy right now are gonna be 4K or greater, but we're worried about making the thing. I'm not worried about making something that runs at 60 FPS 4K. That's a different class. It's a whole different program for people who sort of manage that level of performance on the computer. Okay, this will be achievable by most computers here. Okay, everybody with me? So 1920 by 1080. So this, if you have something that fills up the entire screen, it is this big. Okay, and so if your image that you're bringing into Unity is, what was it? It was like 11,590 pixels. It is over 10 times the width of the screen in pixels, right? And so that's not good, right? That's definitely too much. And so here, for the time being, you may have some larger images because you're like pan over them or something like that. Let's not worry about that for now, right? We want a regular image. If you're, this should be this limit, 1920 by 1080. This should be your highest PNG size, especially for now when we're just bringing stuff in here. Because Punchy's right, if it's bigger than this, it still needs to load it into memory, then you're just taking up a bunch of memory that you're never seeing on the screen at that point. Okay, so if it's bigger than this, what do? Resize in Photoshop. Scale it down there, okay? Don't make your canvas smaller in Procreate. If you've got that figured out and it works well for how it works on the tablet and you're happy with the amount of detail it has, that's fine. But you can take stuff out of there and you might need to rescale it in order to dump it into this environment. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, so here, if we come over to, can we do it out of the Save As dialog box? There's like 4 windows that do this in Photoshop. No. So I'm going to change this to pixels. Now we're down to something far more reasonable. If we export this, probably something like small or for Unity, something like that. And then we can say save. And so now we have something you can bring in that is of the correct size. Let me just look over here. All right, let me just tell this to reload one more time, and we should be able to get rolling here. All right, let's pivot a little bit. Okay, some more about Blender. Let me clear this so this looks like what you would see when you just start off. Okay. Remember, Unity is where we end up. This is the end of our workflow, right? Here, we are going to bring in things from Blender. These will be 3D things, right? They could go directly into Unity. However, part of the thing that we haven't discussed yet, that I can say right now, is that we will not texture them in Blender, right? For all the reasons that you ran into, this is not a good way, this is not a good workflow, right? There's ways to force stuff from one thing to another, but in Blender, in this class, we're not going to learn about materials in Blender or shading in Blender or any of that. What are we going to learn about? We're going to learn about the fundamental shape, the fundamental mesh of what's going on, right? That's what we're making in Blender. When we get to the point where we make those characters, right, like the cool Fox character and the cool Mad Max character, those went out to Substance Painter, which is, for my money, like the best Adobe program by leaps and bounds, and was not developed by Adobe, but just bought by them at some point. I don't think that's a coincidence. And so things go to Substance Painter, and the mesh goes into Unity, and Substance Painter gives us, PNGs, essentially, the PNGs that go on a material in Blender, okay? So this is one of the ways we get things into here, right? Our other workflows here, for instance, what people were doing in Procreate, right? And so here, what Finch is discovering is that the output, right? What is your problem with the output of Procreate? It is too big. So your Procreate output needs to go to Photoshop first to be resized into a smaller PNG. Also, the thing you could, has anybody in here used Adobe Bridge ever? So Bridge is useful for this one thing. You have a pile of PNGs you need to resize. Bridge can do them all at the same time. So that's what Bridge is for. It's like a batch processing app, right? It doesn't really do anything by itself. And so then this would go into Unity. So once again, things are getting animated in Unity, but they're not ending up here. We're not using Unity to draw stuff. We're not using Unity to 3D model stuff. It's the part where everything comes together. Everybody clear on this part here? Okay, good. So Blender. Some of you have more or less experience in here. We're going to be focused on this from the standpoint of like making shapes here, right? Actually making the stuff happen and then worrying about the appearance of them over here. With this, so for instance, let's say we want to make a modular wall, right? So I've used this term before, and I'll use it all semester long. Didn't I use it before? I teach 3 classes in the same day, so I'm not sure who I'm talking to. Modular design. Design. Have I used this? No? Okay. The example here is Lego, right? You don't make the thing. You have all these pieces that you put together to make the thing, right? And so this will be true for the code and the scripting, in that we'll have not tiny, but smaller scripts that you use together. You've done this already, right? We used the animation speed script. That did one job. We used the click on thing script. That did one job. You could put them together and click on something that has variable animation speed. Lego, right? This will also be true. We saw it happen again for the sprite sheet. That sprite sheet example I did had like 5 trees on one sprite, right? And so that was sort of like modular forest, where all of it's together there, and we have parts that we can put together to make a whole. Same thing here for the 3D design. We have modular design, right? And so instead of building an entire castle in Blender and then exporting it and having our game occur in a castle, our approach is going to be to build a wall, to build a corner, to build a barrel, to build a skeleton. And then in Unity, with those parts, we put those parts together to build our castle. Why do that? Could you build a castle 3D model it in Blender? Of course, I'm sure you've seen a ton of things like that, right? But the downside to that is that Unity is not a 3D modeling program. You bring it over, you start doing stuff, and then you're like, I wish this castle had another hallway here. And you gotta go back to Blender, change the thing, and then explore it again, set all the stuff up again. This is not great. If we have the parts, we can just sort of like, okay, well, I'm just gonna take out this wall, put 2 walls there, make a new hallway, whatever, right? Because I've built it out of these parts, and I can rearrange the parts in Unity. Does that make sense? Okay. So, with that in mind, yeah, let's look at this. We'll build some sort of very simple wall, but we'll have to confront a bunch of 3D issues. So this is stuff I would definitely put in my notebook, especially those of you who haven't taken 185, right? And so we're going to model. At the end of the day, models are all made up of points, edges, and faces, right? Faces, you'll hear me use the word polygons a lot, hence the site that we went to. What was the site we went to get that texture? Polyhaven, right? But the Blender word for polygon is face, right? So we'll have this that we'll try to properly organize. We will make sure that, what else do we need to do in Blender? We need to make sure that the anchor point is correct. I discussed this previously because you can't change the anchor point in Unity. It may seem like a total pain in the ass here at the beginning, but it's just the way that the file format works. What else do we need to do? We need to check the normals. I'll explain to you what that is in a second. The normals are going to be the face direction. So when you look at faces in Blender, you kind of immediately visualize them, or at least I do, as pieces of paper, right? It's this idea we could build the outer edge of everything. But that is conceptually incorrect. They only go in one direction. So I displayed this last time. Remember, I turned the thing around and it disappeared, right? So we need to check that in Blender. Then we also need to do a part that seems really irritating at first here, but we're going to sort of do, there's more to say about this, and I'm sure some of you who have done 3D modeling hate this already. UV unwrapping, right? Punchy just had an episode just with me saying that out loud. He skipped a breath. And I wish I had a like a pulse monitor on you there that we could have as a live readout here, right? You can figure out what's Punchy's blood pressure right now as when Casey starts talking about UV unwrapping.
It's worse, so it spikes like crazy. It would probably spike like crazy when it comes to weight painting.
Yeah, I mean, there's parts of 3D modeling that are unnecessarily difficult. This one, like we'll incrementally engage with this. Today, we'll primarily do this in like an automatic way, where you just kind of run a command, and for today, that'll get the job done. Okay, for what we want to do, for making our wall that we're going to use for our procedural design here. Okay, so here's our list of things: anchor point, normals, and UV unwrapping. Okay, this is going to help quite a bit. So let's do that. Okay, so we'll start very simple here. For the most part, we want some sort of wall that we can repeat, right? Like we'll use this castle metaphor here. So I'm going to make something along this line, about like that, okay? And so it's longer in this direction and about proportionally tall, the kind of thing that if we duplicated it, we could start to make some sort of larger space here. Great, I'm going to rename this to wall. And another big thing here, for those of you who don't have this already in Blender, apply scale. What does this mean? It means that the scale of your object, scale in Blender, is relative. This is really important. And you want it to be 1, 1, 1. And when you run the apply scale command, the shortcut is Control A, and then select scale, this will give you 1, 1, 1 scale. 1 what? 1 meter? 1 foot? It's not a metric. It is a proportional number. It just means 1. If you make something that's twice as big, it would be 2, 2, 2, okay? Regardless of how the raw size of it would be. So here, I messed around with the scale in order to make this wall, right? Again, the scale in Blender, S for scale, R for rotate, and G for move. For those of you who don't already have those shortcuts. S, scale, R, rotate, G, move. The thing you can remember there is the grab tool. That helps you remember G, okay? And if you want to, you can constrain those to the X, Y, and Z axes by pressing those. But for today, you know what I recommend? Up here in Blender, check this out. These are checked, right? This means that when you click on an object, you'll get the gizmo, which is not on by default in Blender, which is insane, right? It's like this. And so the program forces you to know all the shortcuts right off the bat, which is, not great. So click there, move, rotate, scale. Now, I don't need to remember the shortcuts at all. I can just use this, which is exactly like all of the other stuff we've done, okay? Except for the aforementioned, which direction is up in Blender? Nope, that's Unity. Unity Y is up. In Blender, the blue one, which one is the blue one, Finch? Z, right? So Z is up here. Great. And so now, if we look at this over here under the, that's not the modifiers, the Object tab, I see this. So this is my point here. This needs to be fixed by saying Control A, scale, right? We're going to apply scale to this, right? So I select this thing, I say Control A, scale, boom. Okay, there we go. So now, this didn't change at all, but now this is the default scale for that cube. Incredibly important. Okay, good. So now, let's go ahead and change the anchor point. We talked about this before, but again, N opens up the window, side panel, whatever this is called. If you go down to Tool, Origins, now, if I select that, I can move the anchor point for the object. And most of the time, if you don't have this down in your notes, I would write it down. The anchor point should be at the center bottom, right? That's for objects that sit on a desk, sit on a floor. That usually makes the most sense, right? What's that? So I selected the object, I went over to Tool, and I clicked Origins. And so now the G and the R key don't apply to the object, they apply to the origin, right? So I just move it down like this. All right? And then I can turn that off. And now if I press the G key, boom, I'm back to moving the object, G, moving the origin, moving the object, okay? And if we look at this, when I'm looking around in Blender, I'm always pressing 1, 3, 7, and 9 because this flips it around to the different orthographic views. So I can get a precise view of what it is I'm looking at, right? And so here, I can see it's at the bottom, good. And if I flip it around to the top, I can see that it's in the middle. And so, mission accomplished, right? I've got the anchor point in the center bottom of the object, which is what I would want for most things. Cool, our wall is on its way. I'm gonna press Alt-G to sort of zero it out, just put it back. And so now, it puts it, puts the origin at 0, 0, 0. Everybody see how that, right? So here, let's simulate what's gonna happen in Unity. Here's the floor, right? I grab my wall, I zero it out, boom. It gets snapped to the ground, right? So that it's right where it needs to be. It's not halfway through the ground so that I need to go move all of my walls so they're all in the right spot, right? So center bottom. That's the case for most things, especially the things that we'll make now, right? If you're making a space station and you got like floating debris and stuff, then maybe things are different. You put the anchor point in the center so it can spin around, whatever. In this case, for making stuff that's going to be a modular part, we've got that. All right. All right. So we're our checklist. Remember, our checklist was anchor point, then normals. Let's look at that, and then finally we'll look at UV unwrapping. Next time I'll type it smaller, so it'll just be easier. Okay. So here. Normals. What are normals? It's the direction it's facing. We talked about this last time. But the best thing to do here is in our view. So over here, in Blender, we've got wireframe, solid, and rendered. Okay? Those of you who've used Blender before, if you come over here and look at it this way, it looks cool because like all of the materials and the lighting are happening. Do we care about that? No, we don't, right? Because we're going to do all of that over in Unity, or if we want to get crazy with it, we're going to do it in Substance Painter, right? That's going to be our strategy for doing this. Did you have a question? Okay. So this, really sweet view over here, you no longer care about it. This one and this one, which show you the geometry and the topology of the object, those are the important ones for us in this class, okay? When you take 185 with me, we'll talk a lot about this view and all the stuff and all the rendering and blah, 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 blah. But in here, we'll talk about that stuff, but in Unity, where it's similar but different. Cool. Okay, so there's solid view or there's wireframe view. Wireframe allows us to see through the object. In solid view here, let's go ahead and come over here. Yeah. And so in this one, the viewport overlays, face orientation. This shows us the normals, right? So we can see what direction it's facing. What do we want to avoid here? We want to avoid having the object inside out. Okay, that's bad. So I'll do this. Once I turn that on, nothing happens. But if I go inside the object, watch what. I have to get the camera inside. Boom, there, it's all red. I'm going to tab into edit mode. We'll get to this in a second. And delete this face just to demonstrate this a little bit better. Okay, so here it is with that off. Okay, so with that off, you're looking at this and you're seeing this and you're like, okay, this seems like a legit way to make a box to bring into Unity, right? No, it's not. Because half of that box would be invisible. And you would not be able to tell that until you had this face orientation on here. Okay, because Blender is not making the backside of the face invisible here, which Unity will do by default. So, yeah, we want to have this checked so we can avoid things that are inside out like this. How do I get this back? If we alt-click here in Edge mode after going into Edit, right? So I tab. For those of you not, tab is a shortcut for going back and forth between edit mode and object mode. Today, I haven't really mentioned this because I've been in object mode the entire time, okay? When I go into edit mode, that's when I can delete individual faces or move points around. We won't do much of that today, right? So most of today we're in object mode, but here I need to fill this in that I just deleted. So I'm gonna alt-click the edge and then press F for fill, and that fills it in with a face. And so I've fixed the thing I deleted there. Okay, so we've made sure that none of this is inside out, right? And so we're pretty good. Okay, now let's UV unwrap this. And so for today, that's going to be a pretty short thing. I'm going to go into edit mode, right? So I'm in object. There we go. I'm in object. Now I'll go into edit. I want to select all the faces. So go to face mode. Press A. That gives me all of them. And if you had to guess what the shortcut was for UV unwrapping, what key do you think it is? For UV unwrapping. UV unwrapping. Very good. Yes. Right? You set the UV unwrapping one. And so here, there's a lot of stuff for today. We can use Smart UV Project. Okay? This is going to essentially, quote unquote, automatically create a UV map that's going to work for, if I had to describe when this will work best, for simple, squarish objects. For if it checks both of those boxes, it's not ludicrously complex, and it kind of has 4 sides to it, then this is going to do like a reasonable job of UV unwrapping it. Okay, for those of you who studied this at all, UV unwrapping, part of what makes it difficult is that there's really different ways to make it work. The default line that everyone uses is that it's really more of an art than a science, man, in terms of UV unwrapping. But it's definitely some science that you need to understand there. But for the most part, why do we need to do this? If you had to memorize one thing, it would be this. It assigns pixels to faces. Right? If we want to take all these pictures, these PNGs, and wrap them around geometry, they need to have certain pixels that get assigned to them. So here, I'm going to go to Smart UV Project, and I'm going to say unwrap. You won't see anything happening here because we don't have any textures on this. If you were to look at this over here we have the UV map for this. So again, everything I've done up until now has been in just the regular layout, and then there's a UV editing one. I'm going to step back. There we go. And so here, this is the UV map for the default cube. Okay? And so what do we have here? I'm going to do something. You don't need to follow along with this. I'm just going to use this for the sake of explanation. Which one am I looking for? Which one is over here? They installed Blender 5 for me over here, so I've got to update some of these things. There we go. Okay, so we have this over here. You guys have seen stuff like this probably just poking around on the internet looking at 3D models, right? Where people have this grid. Sometimes the grid is like super fun checkers. Let's do the color one. There we go. Stuff like this, right? Usually there's like letters and numbers and other things over here. What is this? Why is it important? If we can show this over here. This is the UV unwrapping image, which is being projected into this space. And so over here, this is UV space. Essentially, it's a fancy name for saying 2D, right? Because at the end of the day, the problem is the Christmas present problem, right? We've got some sort of 3-dimensional shape. We need to take 2-dimensional wrapping paper and wrap it around the 3-dimensional shape. When you have a box, this is trivial. Most people can get it done, right? When you start to get something weirder than a box, then you're like, okay, this is gonna, either you end up with like a mass of crinkled paper, or the paper rips a bunch, right? Why is that? Because there's no way to do it perfectly. You're taking two-dimensional information and projecting it into 3D. You're losing a dimension. This is like a fundamental conceptual problem. It's not like no one's figured out how to do it. It's just the result of taking 2D stuff and wrapping it around 3D space. So for instance, if I come in here and grab one of these faces in edit mode, let's say this one, there we go. And so this face is represented by this box. So watch what happens. If I take this box here and scale it up, again, just pressing the S, it's getting more and more pixels assigned to it, which is why we're seeing more and more of the grid on it here. If I take it, make it smaller, press S, scale it down, you see it's getting less and less pixels. If it gets really small, it starts to look really crappy, right? It looks blurry because, again, it's just pixels, it's just rasterized information. And so why doesn't it look blocky? It's because the programs, instead of drawing each pixel as a individual block of color, it kind of fades between them. And so you get this thing happening. So there's that. And you can see, not only does it do this, but then if I start to smush it in one direction or the other, the image gets smushed in one direction or the other. And so what do we want to have over here? Do we want more pixels or less assigned to our object? If you just had to guess. More, right? More pixels means we can put more picture on it. That's going to mean that we have more detail, or at least the possibility of having more detail, right? And so this is one of the things. When you're looking at this, the UV map for certain objects may seem kind of confusing here at first, but my point here is that this is worse than that, right? The second thing, these are taking up more space on the UV, right? The UV space is almost always a square, okay? And if we get more pixels in those boxes, that's better. So that's good. Now watch what happens when I run that automatic thing, okay? Right now, this is not good. Why is this not good? Look at this. Sort of weird distortion on this side. Over here, totally smushed. Over here, bizarrely stretched, right? This is not great, right? Because it's distorted. That's just, and part of the reason people use these grids is that it's easy to see when it's not good, right? If you use some sort of like picture of a sunset or something like that, it's just more difficult to know what the exact proportions are of that and be able to tell whether or not it's distorted on the 3D image. If you use this color-coded grid, it just makes it very easy to tell, like, is this chopped up? Is it properly aligned? I know this is supposed to look like a square. Does it look like a square? If so, it's easy to see. Anyways, edit mode, smart UV project, and then you don't have to do anything here. Just say unwrap, and boom. Look what it did. It rearranged all of the faces to fit in the UV space. So that's the first thing to notice. Notice how nothing is outside of the square. It all fits in there. That's good. And then B, it also sort of like scaled it up so it's taking up most of this. Like we have this little bit of unused space up here. That's okay. You're going to have some, unless you're just UV unwrapping one plane, you're going to have some unused pixel space, right? But you'd rather have less than more. And so now when we look at this, does this look better? Yeah, way better, right? The grid is undistorted, right? And I can clearly see. And as I move around the side, it's there's a seam here. It's not continuous. That's not a big problem for us today. Okay, that's later on. We can discuss whether that is a problem or not. And so now, yeah, it's just undistorted as opposed to what we had before. It rescaled all these, and if you look at them now, they look proportional to the shapes that we have over here, right? Here's one side. There's the other. There's the other. There's the other, right? And so especially in a box like this, the other UV metaphor is, making a cardboard box out of the shape, right? There, you have the cardboard box before you assemble it is just this flat piece of cardboard that's cut up, right? That's very much like the UV map to some extent. And then you fold it up into this three-dimensional thing. And that works fine when it's a box, right? If I asked you to make a origami cardboard swan, there's going to be a lot more issues there, right? In terms of like the folding of the cardboard, the distortion of the shape, all those sort of things, right? So, yeah, UV map. Okay, good. Let's come back to layout now. And we have, right, all of this stuff was our mesh export checklist. And again, those three things were anchor point, normals, and then UV unwrap. UV unwrap. But we did UV unwrapping in a way that was not a total hassle. It was a little bit easy because this is a simple object, and it works well with this one automatic algorithm. Cool. Okay, so we've got something here. I renamed it wall. This is also super important because when you bring it in, it's going to be problematic. Like if you just never rename anything, you bring it into Unity, you just have cube after cube after cube after cube. And so that's not great. Okay, and so now, remember, I linked to, in the assignment, that Blender add-on I wanted you to install, which is not installed here. So let's pull it up, just so everyone can see me do that again. And the main thing that this Blender add-on is doing is allowing us to just click one button to export it, and it solves the scale issues and it solves the arrow issues. And so that makes it much simpler. If we come back here to, I haven't checked the live stream. Okay, everything good on the live stream? You guys can still hear me? I hope so. Over here, over here. Okay, so here's the link I'll give you this week. It was not on the thing. So, what is this? Again, this is GitHub. This is where people post code. One of the code things that you could post here is Blender add-ons. So Blender add-ons that are not available on their add-ons or extensions, right? And this, what format do you want a Blender add-on to be? A zip file, okay? So when you download a Blender add-on, it should be a zip file, and then you can just drag onto the interface. There you go. So I will come over to code, download, there we go, and here it is, delivery kit, zip, and now I can go to my downloads folder, which is here, and there we go. So, oops, here, there we go. I will drag the zip from here to here and let go. Okay. And now I get this menu down here, If I press N, launch, delivery, and so this window is really super useful. You just make sure you have this selected, and you can just export directly to, you can go directly to the Blender project. I'm just going to go to the desktop. And so I'll just say accept and export, right? By default, it should say FBX Unity 3D. So if you don't have that written down, write that down, right? From Blender, when you save a Blender file, what kind of file is that? .blend. And then when you export, you're going to export an FBX file, which is just another format of a 3D thing, and then you'll import that into Unity. And so that's what we exported here. Now back in Unity. I'll grab this. I'm going to make a blank scene to sort of start from scratch. Not material. Right click, create scene, there we go. Castle, there we go. Open this up, great. And so now, let's make a folder. I got my mesh folder. I'm going to grab this. On the desktop, here's the wall. Bring that in. Oh my gosh. File, import. Again, I can't drag it in because of that irritating error. Cool. Let's bring this in. There we go. Let's make a floor just out of a plane for now. There we go. And so now I've got this. Because this anchor point is worked out, if I were to drag this onto the scene, it should play really nice, right? See how when I drag this on, the anchor point gets projected onto the floor, which makes it really easy to just come in and start doing stuff. If I hold down Control, I can move things around here to start building, you know, a structure out of this part there that has been correctly set up on all of this stuff. Make sense? Okay, let's reap the rewards of figuring out the UVs on this by applying a material. So let's grab, we'll do a castle. So here, I'm going to come into Polyhaven for now to grab things, right? And so this, we want to go to Assets, Textures, there we go. And I'll use one different one. Yeah, this one, Damage Plaster. Okay. And so anybody remember what the two maps are that are going to give me the most use? Yeah, these two are going to be the biggest bang for my buck here, right? Diffuse in terms of this is going to be just the color, and then this is like the bumpiness. And so again, do I want PNG or JPEG here? For right now, JPEG is fine. So 2K, meaning 2,000 pixels across, right? So again, the texture will be 2,000 pixels, right? How big is the entire screen? Less than that, 1920, right? And so even if the wall filled up the entire screen, it should still look pretty good, right? So you do not need to explore 4K, 8K, and 16K options, okay? Don't do it. It shouldn't have even shown you that. And so now, over here, diffuse, PNG, awesome. Let's save this. Under downloads, or I'll just put it on the desktop for now. And then I'll also grab the normal map. So normal GL, PNG. Again, if you don't have it in your notes already, normal map is always blue. Always looks like this, right? Because the other thing I would write in my notes is that we're taking X, Y, Z, like the angle that the light reflects off of, and we're encoding it in RGB, which is why it looks like this, right? We're getting a new angle value for every pixel. If you understand this, this is the great opening up of your mind to understand textures, is that pixels are not just vehicles for storing color. You can store any data in them. Angles, roughness, transparency, subsurface scattering, whatever. It's just a big grid of data.
Taking such a long time to realize, like, just now that, like, it's blue because the z-axis reflects off blue, which is the depth of the image.
Yep. Yeah, so it's all blue. That XYZ will look, no, in 185 would do that. So here, I'm going to go ahead and make, where did my wall go? Put it in mesh. There we go. Okay. And now over here, create new material. There we go. This is going to be plaster. And let's bring in the, I have to use the import, asset, import. Get both of these, import, there we go. And they both need to go into, I'm just gonna put everything in this mesh folder so we can see what's going on for right now. And so these two, this is something else you need to write down in your notes. The top of it is you have a material. The material has channels, okay? The channels, one obvious channel here is color, right? Color, normal, roughness. On the channels, you will put textures, right? Texture is just the, 3D word for image, right? Just pixels. In this case here, when we're doing it as a texture, it could be a PNG or a JPEG. A JPEG will work here because we're not really worried about the transparency for this right now. Okay, so JPEGs would be a legit way to save texture space, but we also don't need to worry about being that efficient right now. Great. And so here, I just need to assign these textures to a material channel. And so I select the material. Here is the base color, the base map. I can take the base map and dump it into here, right? And then take the material and just drag it on to the wall. Then I can take the normal map, and I need to do something first. Is that this, because of that thing, right? This is not color, it is data, right? You need to tell, not data. You need to tell Unity that. When you bring in a normal map, the new version of Unity sometimes pops up a box. I don't know if anyone saw that. That says like, hey, looks like this is a normal map. Do you want me to do a normal map to it? And you can just say yes. Here we need to do it manually. We'll select it. Then we'll come over here to texture type and say normal map. Boom. Good. And so then apply because it's an asset. And we'll drag this onto the normal map slot. Boom. There we go. And so now you can see what a huge difference that made in the appearance of the wall, right? Here it is without. Fine, right? Here it is with. Boom. Now, it's important to understand that this is not changing the geometry. This is just sort of like fake depth that's on top of it. But it does part of the thing that makes it convincing is it does interact with the light. So for instance, if I come in here and get rid of the direction, or just turn off the directional light, and then come in and make a point light, like so, and then grab this point light and move it where I can't see where we are. There we go. Here we go. All right. And so now, if I zoom in here so we can see what we're doing, and I start to move this light around, watch the surface of this wall. Look at the crevices. See how the shadowing changes in the crevices? Again, no real geometry. This whole wall is one face, one polygon. So from a computer standpoint, super efficient, right? Because it can do a lot of pixels. More polygons is more work, but you know, like even if this were 100 faces, it would still be pretty performant. So not only is the crevicing and shadowing important here, but then also, what else can we do with this? The main thing is over here, selecting this, right? Our smoothness, right? So if I turn this down, it starts to look rougher. And if I turn this up, again, you have to select the material. It'll start to look, kind of like it's wet. But be careful with this. If I turn it up a lot, see how it gets real sparkly here? And watch what happens when I move this around. See how everything looks really sparkly? Some students are like attracted to this at the beginning, like moths, I guess, where like you're like, ooh, I want my thing to look like this. No, don't do that. It's just going to end up being really flickery, especially when the player's moving around in the scene and everything. Like, so thinking about probably not jamming the smoothness value the whole way up. Something like that still looks, wet, but doesn't have that, like all of that crazy flickering going on all the time. So this should look substantially different, right? So just for comparison, you could say, Casey, that really seemed like a crap ton of work for doing this, coming in and I'll just smush this, I'll do this, I'll do this, and then I'll throw this on it, and boom. Why not just do that? This is not perfectly proportional, right? Because I kind of did this. If we look at the edge of the wall over here, look at this. Over here, let me move the light. Just trying to move stuff around. There we go. Right? See what happened over here? See how this is all smushed, right? Why is it like that? Because this is, it's not that it's not UV unwrapped. It is. It's just that the UV unwrap is bad, right? It's essentially just distorted. The UV shape doesn't reflect the 3D shape, right? You want things to be proportional there. That the UV shape is proportional to the 3D shape. That's going to result in distorted texture.
Sometimes in certain programs kind of like help fix that, the Wax Studio, where they make the material not really reflect the UV mapping. So like if you shrink it down this size or like on the size of like the texture itself, it'll shrink along with it, but not exactly squish, so it's more procedural.
Mm-hmm. That's called triplanar mapping. We're getting there. Yeah.
I didn't know we could do this.
Yeah. Triplanar mapping. I don't think I have the shader for that. I'll bring that on Wednesday. We'll get to that. But yeah, that's one way around. Doing some of this, there's some ups and downs to that. But yeah, but we can see, and also the anchor point for that was like in the wrong place, right? It's like in the middle of the cube. So this is way more useful. So I've got this, and now I can come over here and do the tiling. When you do the tiling, be careful. There's this details. We're not dealing with that. Just go ahead and fold it up. Under the one above that, this is the actual tiling. And so here you can adjust this. You'd want to, in order to keep this from getting smushed, because we went through the trouble of UV unwrapping it, keep this proportional, right? So I could go ahead and say 3, 3, right? And so now it's undistorted, but we get way more of the pattern in there. So now that looks pretty nice in that we've got this useful 3D shape. If you turn up the tiling too much, even though it doesn't really have a seam that we can see, at some point if I go 10, 10, even though it's seamless, you can see it repeating, which just sort of looks lame, right? So maybe 3, 3 there, looks better. Cool. And so now I would say that this is like a really good, usable, modular asset, right? And so in that case, when we use modular assets in Unity, we turn them into what? What is a reusable thing? Prefabs, right? And so I come over here to prefab, and I select this, because this is the correctly configured wall, and prefab, and then drag it down here, and now I have that. And so now, for instance, I'm going to go ahead and turn on a couple things. Number one is make sure that this says pivot. It should always say pivot. Number two is that you can turn on snapping here. And so now if I were to drag this up, snapping, grid, does the grid need to be bigger? Why am I not snapping to the grid? There we go. I guess it doesn't snap when you drag it in. I'll make one, and now I can move it around. There we go. And so now, Control D, Control D, Control D, right? Control D. The grid also allows me to turn this in 90-degree fashion. I can come in here and put all this stuff in here. Right, I can line these things up, start to build a space. The client comes back, or I decide that like, oh, this doesn't need to be the end of a hallway. I can move it over. I can grab multiple ones of these, Control D, move it over, start to create more of a space that I could look around in here. It'll look even better if there's any sort of shadowing. So if I turn on shadows, there we go. Turn this up a little bit. Okay, right there, let me point that out. I think we mentioned that. Anybody remember what that is? Yeah, so this is things that are overlapping there. And so because we're on the grid, it should be easy to just sort of move this over. If it snaps too far, just sort of turn off snapping and then just move it over, but make sure you're not running into each other. There we go. Now I'm good. There's some Z fighting over there when these things intersect, but chances are players not even seeing that most of the time, right? And players over here in the catacombs that we've made. Let's do it with another asset. Getting our Blender feet wet. I know some of you are already very proficient, Arlinka, but getting everybody up to speed here. Yes, what Arlinka says is like, what's cool is you can also store animation and textures. Yes, so that's like a super efficient way to store animation. So now, we've got one asset, right? So a good starter point for here, right? Wall, door, pillar. That's a good if you got those three things, like that's a good starting point to use as like, you could build a lot of stuff out of that, right? So let's do the other ones. Shift A and cylinder. And yeah, this is going to be too big. I'm going to edit the cylinder here down to, well, we'll leave it at, no, we'll put it at 16 around. There we go. And then let's adjust this. So again, I'll look at it from the top. I know that I'm going to want it to eventually interact with the wall here. So just sort of setting it up, trying to figure that out. Let's scale it down, kind of like so, and then scale it up in this direction, maybe a little bit bigger. There we go, kind of like that, kind of over. There we go. Let's get the shading worked out. So over here, I want it to be bigger. I want it to be twice as thick at the wall. So if we look at this over here, let's scale this up about like that. Move this over, kind of like that. There we go. Now it's too tall. And so we'll need to scale it down. And we've messed with the scale a lot, so we need to apply what? Yep. So I'm going to right click and say Shade Auto Smooth. I'm going to come over to Control A, Scale. Boom. Okay, now let's go down our checklist. What is our checklist? Normals, and then UV. Cool. Okay, so now let's do it. Anchor point. Let's check the scale. We're good. I'm going to look at it from the side. In this case, yeah, center bottom. So come in here to tiles, origins, down here. Boom. That's done. Now, normals, are we okay? If I come in and look at the center of it, it looks fine. What would I not want to see? Something like this. I'm going to go ahead here and say mesh, normal, flip, right? And so this is what I would not want to see, right? That means one face has been flipped here, and you can't really, that's not going to show up correctly in Unity. How do I fix this? Tab into edit mode, grab all the faces, go to normals or mesh, normals, recalculate outside. Usually fixes everything so that it looks the right direction. Cool. All right, so we did step 1, anchor point. Step 2, normals. Maya, what's step 3? Anchor point, normals. You know the answer to this. UV unwrapping, yes. So, same thing. We need to come over to, you have to go to edit mode and make sure all the faces are selected. So A, and then U, and Smart UV Project. Here, let's look at what this looks like beforehand. So under UV editing, it's not bad, but it's not proportional. We don't see the grid over here because I didn't click on the thing. You don't need to worry about that right now. Anyways, U, Smart UV Project, unwrap, boom. Now it looks proportional. This is the proportional size of the top to the sides. And so this is a thing where it's more complicated than the box, right? We've got this tube, and so you have to have some sort of seam down the length of the tube in order to roll it flat, right? Think about if you had a packing tube. If you tried to flatten that, you either do it from the side and just smush it down, or you do it from the top, which is physically not really possible because that's the strongest structural angle of the tube, right? So, good. All right, and this is going to become a pillar. Pillar. and export this. So come back to layout, come back to here, come back to here, and yeah, have this selected, export. And we come back to Unity. Let's bring it in. Asset, import new asset. Put this into our mesh folder. There we go. And if we drag this in, boom. Notice up here, our transform looks great. No weird rotations, right? So this is something, if you've done it correctly, the rotation should be 0, 0, 0. If it's like 0, 180, negative 90, that's not correct, okay? And then also the scale should be 1, 1, 1, not 100, 100, 100. That's also not going to be great. So all of that is there, ready to go. I can put this material on it. And now I've got something I could use to start building our space. All right, so having everything UV unwrapped properly, being able to apply a reasonably sized texture. Right, remember, this was, how big was this one? 2K, right? So plenty of detail, unless you're going to walk right up to the wall and stare at it. Why is my thing so weird all of a sudden?
It's weird because it's like, some programs do that where like you can't zoom in forever and it slowly gets more and more precise. It's gonna be like, oh, okay, so as you zoom in, we're gonna get like even slower and slower increments.
Yeah,
You
sort of.
angle your camera and you have to like play around.
There we go. Now we can get super close. Right, it breaks down when we get this close to it, but in general, pretty good. Okay, let's do door, because that'll allow us to learn something new in Blender over here. So let's come back to Blender and set this up. Okay, door. So again, modular parts that go together. And in this case, because they're not super huge parts, you can design them all in the same blend file. So let's save as here. This is going to be called AVC 200, and I'll call this modular parts dot blend. There we go. Okay, so now we want to cut a hole in this. We need another add-on, preferences, add-ons, or no, I think it's under extensions. We want the bool, yes, bool tool, for short for Boolean. The idea that we can add and subtract to the shape here. And so with that in mind, here, that is enabled. And so now I'm going to make a new cube and sort of use this as a starting point for my door. Let's make it kind of half as big over here and make it thinner clearly. There we go. Let's go ahead and Control A on this. Scale. There we go. And so now if we tab into edit mode, Let's do this way. We're going to go ahead and grab that's on. This is on. I'm in object mode. What is going on with my shortcut here? This is on, that's on. Oh, shift. There we go. Okay. Step 1, make sure bool tool is enabled. Preferences, add-ons, search for bool, B-O-O-L, bool tool, right? Better, the good news is Blender has a lot of add-ons. The bad news is Blender has a lot of add-ons, right? There's just a ton of them. So make sure that's on. Yeah, the box is just regular. And so I've got this and I got this. So check this out. Click, shift click, and now I'm going to go Control Shift numpad minus, not the minus over by the 0, the one over on the numpad. If I do that, watch what happens. Boom. I subtract one object from the other. Let me go in the other direction. Click, shift click, minus. Cuts it in the other way. Here we go. I'll go this direction. So here, here. Boom. See how this could be useful for creating doors, right? Now what is going on here? This is creating, it's subtracting one shape from the other shape. So it's giving us this cut. So the order matters, right? And so here, shift gives us that. You're subtracting the first shape from the second shape. Let's write that down. So essentially you want to click the thing that's going to cut the door first, then the wall. So door, wall, Control Shift minus. If you're on a laptop, in order to get the minus to work correctly, you need to make sure you go to the preferences, input, and then if you have emulate numpad checked, you can use the one that's next to the 0 along the top of the keys. But I have a full keyboard, so I am not doing that in this case. So now, yeah, this allows us to do a lot to actually change the shape of what's going on here. We can do this over and over again. Control, let's make another cube here. And so I'll move this one over and cut something over here, like so. Like this. Or let's say I want a smaller window. I'll scale this down, move it over, make sure that's intersecting, whoops, with this. Up, scale down a little bit, move over, and now I'll select window, wall, Control Shift minus, boom, cuts that into it. We could do this with multiple objects, right? So let's say I want a whole bunch of holes in this. So I'll take this, and then I'll Shift D X, or sorry, Z to move it up. Shift D Z. And now I'll take these three, click, 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 Control J, which joins them together, and then click, Shift click, Control Shift minus, cuts those into the wall, right? So I'm able to make something that's a little bit more interesting here with this approach. And I'm working on my modular setup. Wall, door, wall, pillar. It's good to go. So now, same process, right? Get the anchor point worked out. So here, let's do that. Bring this down. There we go. Let's go ahead and turn that off. It's at the center bottom. That's what I want. Now, normals are good. You know, if we saw any red, because we have this turned on, we would be able to tell. Now we just need to UV unwrap it. Tab to edit. A, grab all of the faces. I'm going to go to UV edit mode so you can see this. Okay, so here is the current UV map for this window door, right? See what it looks like over here? And so now if I right or press U and Smart UV project on this, watch the UV map. Boom. Rearranges it, takes up more space here. On objects like this where there's like a hole in them, there's like, can we be filling this space in? Maybe, like depending on what the shape is there, but that's, you know, pretty good. Good, so it's been UV unwrapped. We got everything set up. This I'm gonna call door. Now, I'll be able to bring that in. So let's come over back to layout, over to launch, have door selected, export that, and bring it in over here. And bring that in. Again, if I turn on snapping here, I'm able to start to align this with the other parts of the scene. Maybe it's a little bit high, the anchor point there, but now it's got the UV map that works. If I turn on snapping here, I can put the material on this. There we go. And because it's UV unwrapped, it looks reasonable with the other stuff. All right, and so now, modular assets, right? I can make meta modular assets. For instance, I've got these reusable parts here. Let's take this one and come over to prefabs. I've got my wall. Where's my pillar? There's the pillar. Did I prefab this? No. Prefab that. And then grab the door. Prefab that. There we go. Delete some of this stuff. There we go. And now let's make something like this. Again, we'll see how this comes together. Like that. And so Shift D, or sorry, Control D. Shift D is going to be Blender. Control D is Unity to duplicate. There we go. So I've got this double-ended thing with the pillars in the middle as a space, right? And so now all of this stuff, wall, wall, pillar, pillar, door, door, right? Let's save and take all of these and use create empty parent. Boom. There we go. And so now they're all under this. I'll call this, I don't know, room. And then, that's there. And so now I could go through the process of taking room, turning that into a prefab. And now I can easily start to populate my whole space with rooms, perhaps start to build rooms on top of other rooms. I could make other, rooms out of these assets, so on and so forth here, right? All of these things can start to go together, right? You've all intuitively experienced this in video games, right? Where it's like, this is cool, but like I can definitely see them like reusing some stuff, right? They're reusing stuff, right? Like there's both technical and artistic reasons for that, right? If they didn't reuse some of the stuff, sometimes a lot of the worlds would probably end up looking like really haphazard and unconnected artistically. And then also that works out technically in that you don't have to like load more stuff into RAM. So there's that. Right? And so this, right, is what I would call a meta modular asset made up of other smaller modular assets, right? Just like Lego. I haven't watched this stuff with the new, what do they call it, Smart Brick thing. They released some sort of like super cool programmable brick thing. I haven't watched the announcement yet. So here, you can see how we could be on our way to building something. If we could be a little bit more careful with the alignment, so on and so forth. It depends what we would want to do. Now, like with the bricks here, not the Lego bricks, the bricks in the pattern, there's an issue. Part of the thing about being studious about the scale, if I come back to the original pillar mesh, not the prefab, it's in here, and I want giant pillars for the front of the castle, right? And so making a pillar that's twice as tall is pretty easy. I can just come in here and go 2, 2, 2, boom, I'm done, right? But now when I apply this, the bricks are twice as large, which doesn't really look right. Let me turn on the directional light. There we go. Right, and so you can see it here. But, so this is important to understand. The material settings are per material. Remember, if I change the material settings, if I come to the material, this is kind of like prefabs, but different. right? If I were to tint this, everything that the material is applied to gets tinted, right? And don't do that, it looks terrible. So in order to give the, if I were to, by the same right, if I come in here and change the tiling, right? Because I want denser bricks here, not here, but over here because this is giant, right? If I change the tiling on this to like 5, 5, 5, they all change. So the solution here is to duplicate the material. So if I control drag the asset, right? And I could say that this one is going to be plaster large, and then drag that onto here, right? At first, it doesn't look like anything changes because it's the same settings. But now if I look at plaster large, I can change the tiling without having the other stuff change. So it's a different, and so now this looks big, right? Before, that's what it looked like. And it kind of just looks like awkwardly scaled. It doesn't look like a massive pillar, right? Part of what makes, this is a key art thing. Big things need tiny detail. That's part of what makes them look big. And so here, same thing. Now I've got this here. Come in to materials. There we go. Here, I go 5, 5, right? It starts to give this, when there's that many more layers of bricks layered on top of this thing, it starts to give it this much more massive look over there. Okay, so a lot of Blender stuff there, right? But with these, you know, again, it's not a 3D modeling class, but in order to participate in the world of like interesting stuff, you need to be able to do some 3D things. And the things we covered today are kind of like some pretty basic things that are going to help your process here, right? So a lot of what we're doing here, creating these modular assets for the game. So we're able to, you know, use those. Yeah. Let's do one more thing, and then we'll call it. Barrel or no, we'll bring that next time. Bring in a box. Okay, let's make a rock. You rock, rock. Here we go. Blender. We've got this. We want a rock, a reusable rock that we can use, right? So we'll keep it pretty simple for now. We're going to Shift A, and we'll come in here with the cube. This may seem like a strange choice to start for the rock, but you'll get it here in a second. We're going to need more subdivisions for this. And so I'm going to tab into edit mode and select all of the faces by pressing A, right click. We have subdivide. We're going to use the tool. So I'm going to click subdivide, and then over here we have some options. So let's go to smoothness. And here you can see it starts to change the shape of the cube. If I turn up the number of cuts, we kind of turn the cube into a sphere. What does this give us? It gives us more points along the surface of this. Okay, we've got, so again, I'll do that whole process. Select all the faces, right click, subdivide, then under smoothness, if that's at 0, it'll just be subdividing with no smoothing. Here we start to smooth, and then turning up the number of subdivisions to like maybe 3. That's enough to get started. Okay, good. So this was the subdivision tool. Okay, and so when I'm done, there we go. I have points, and I can grab these points and move them around to do stuff. This is a terrible way to move them. I'm not going to do that. What am I going to do? I'm going to scale this down. So let's go ahead and scale it down. Let's apply scale, Control A, mesh, or Control A, scale. There we go. And so now I want to, all the things we did here were pretty precise. Square, cutting out squares, scaling things, right? I want to be more free over here. Just sort of like push this stuff around to make it, you know, kind of form just an irregular shape. And so I am going to use the sculpting tools, right? And the easiest way is to go into sculpt mode. So select the ball, right click and say shade smooth. Why didn't I just make a sphere to begin with? Because the topology that we get by doing the subdivides makes a bunch of perfectly or reasonably same quads. That'll be important later. Take my word for it, right? Not the icosphere, not the UV sphere. This is sort of better topology to use. Okay, so I'll go to sculpting, and sculpting looks super fun. Let's select the cube here, now to be soon be called rock. There we go. And with our rock, there's a bunch of really great sculpting brushes down here. You don't need to really know about any of them. We're really concerned with just 2 of them right now. One, and mostly just one. And that one is the grab brush. This guy right here. And let's move this down. If I grab the grab brush, F allows you to make the brush bigger. And so now I can grab stuff here. Let's make sure I had this selected. Object mode, there we go. Selected, go to sculpt mode. There we go. And so now I can grab parts of it and just sort of smush it around however I would want. If I change the size of the brush, I can sort of move smaller parts of it, and you can see now I can start to, you know, just have fun with this, make it sort of more of an irregular shape. The main things here to be careful of are the normals issue. We have that selected, so watch what happens if I grab, does this show up in this view? No, it doesn't. I'm going to turn on face orientation so that I have the same safety. What I don't want to do is this. Drag things inside out like that. I don't think I need to say. Everyone understands why that would be bad at this point, right? And so you don't have total freedom here, but it allows you to work in a way that's way less technical. We're able to just sort of mush these points around in order to create this sort of more irregular looking shape. Right, not a rock that's going to be part of the surface, just this random rock that we can put around. Again, all of this, I've only used the grab tool and using the F key to rescale the brush. If the brush is really big, it kind of just like stretches the whole thing. Stretching this super far is also not advisable. You don't want to get it super deformed from its original shape. Okay, so this gets us close-ish. That's fine. Okay, great. Let's do the same stuff. Our normals are okay because I turned on the face orientation there. Let's get the anchor point. So here, what do you think about the anchor point? What would make sense? Do we want to put it at the center bottom like usual? Finch, what do you think? How are we going to want to put this rock? Is there like a clear up for this rock? But it's a rock. Like it doesn't, like there's no, you could be this way or you could roll it over and be on the other side, right? In which case, if you want to roll something over, where would the anchor point be easiest to be? Exactly, in the middle, right? And so here, I'm going to do that. So under here, locations, not locations, origin. Let's move this to the center there. Let's flip the view around to make sure we're okay. So here, move it in the middle, look at it from the top. Yeah, there we go. It's reasonably in the middle. Okay, that's good, right? Because we may want to, in order to not make it look like it's obvious that the rock is repeating, we're able to do something with the rock that we can't really do with like the door. We can't like flip the door upside down. It would just look dumb, right? It's not creating variation. It just look incorrect. With the rock, yeah, we could flip it around a bunch of different ways and make it look like different rocks, right? Or at least make it look different. Good. Okay, so UV unwrapping this. Tab A. Let's come to UV edit. And so here, it's set up like a cube, because that's what it started off as. If we press U, Smart UV Project, boom. Okay, so now we start to see the limits of Smart UV Project, right? Remember what I told you before? Smart UV Project works best for what kind of things? Squarish stuff, right? And a rock is like, not as good. So now under U here, these other algorithms up here, these are also smart, they're algorithms, right? The idea that we called this one smart is ridiculous and arbitrary, right? They're just other algorithms, okay? And so here, if we picked one of these other ones, actually, if we came in, no, we don't need to do that here. You can see it'll split this up. That's angle-based, minimum stretch.
You need to add seams to those.
Yeah, we don't have any seams. I don't want to do any seams today. So let's, this is keeping the seams from the UV unwrap, from the smart one. So we'll just leave it, because you know what we're going to do? We're going to fix this with the thing that Punchy talked about last time, triplanar mapping. We're not going to do that today. We'll do that Wednesday. But when we use triplanar mapping, it can make a maybe not so great UV map work a little bit better. So we've got a rock. Let's export this rock. Let's tab out. Let's come over here to layout. Come over here this way. Export this rock. Make sure I've applied scale. Yes. Okay. And there we go. And back in here. Boom. Let's grab under meshes here. delete that. Let's bring in our rock. So here, assets, import new asset, rock. There we go. If I bring this in, there we go. That looks all right. There's a little bit of faceting here. We can address some of that later on. It'll be most pronounced when it's just like gray. Once you throw a texture on there, it'll look less obvious. There's some things we could do here, but for today. Right, so now I've got this, and this could be one rock. Control D, move it over. And now if I press R to rotate it, I can create another, just by randomly rotating it, especially because like half of it is in the ground, I can create like a rock formation that's reasonably convincing out of like one rock, right? And so now under here, let's go ahead and grab another texture to use as a starting point. So over here, here, here. Rock. Okay, so what do we want here? We want sort of a, something like this. Not really. We want something that's more of just sort of like a plain rock surface. So this looks good. We'll grab this, and we will use the diffuse and save image as. There we go. And we'll grab the normal. And let me bring those in. There we go. Put them over here. There we go. Make sure that this is a normal map, like we talked about, and make a new material. Create material. There we go. This will be rock. And we need to put the textures on the channels of the material. There we go. And this can go on there. Boom. And boom. Okay. Now, yeah, it looks pretty good off the bat here. If I were to start rotating this around, we'll see in some places we'll have some maybe seams that don't look quite as good. We can adjust this in the shader when we look at that on Wednesday, right? And so now, same kind of thing. I could come over here and Control D this, move this thing, right? Maybe scale it up within, a certain amount. There we go. Move it over, move this around, like so. All right, like that. And then, right, do the same thing I just talked about before. These three rocks get a parent object. And this becomes rock formation. This gets prefabbed. And now I have rock formations I can use to populate the scene. And you could have even more in here. All right, and so now as I'm walking along the outside of my castle, I've got rocks over here and other stuff over there. Sound good? Right, does Blender seem a little less intimidating? again, stick to what we're doing here. We're gonna build out a 3D environment for us to walk around in here so that we can get used to how this works. Okay, awesome. I look forward to seeing everybody's simple compositions on Wednesday, right? Again, take something you've drawn, anything, a picture, give it a little bit of interactivity, a little bit of animation. That's the whole idea.
Does the drawing have to be yours?
No. Focus more on like, what's the skill we wanted to build this week? Know how to import stuff into Unity, images, sounds, 3D models, and show me you can do that, right? Doesn't mean to be an incredible artistic statement. It just needs to have some stuff.